Hello and welcome to the Broadacre Farm module. In this module we're going to be breaking down the permaculture design approach to the large acre farm system. So in New Zealand that's mostly a grazing system. So to break that down we're going to look at the ecology of a grazing system and the ruminants or grazer biology and how to manage that system in a holistic grazing context, the overall design of a grazing system, and in the New Zealand context, how could we best manage the pastures for the optimal health for the grazing animals. So that's all to come. So when we look at the ecology of a grassland system, it's a bit of a patchwork pattern in what it looks like, and you have various cloud forms of different groups of tree systems normally. Sometimes they're by themselves or often a collection of trees gathered together, and they act as little islands of habitat in the context of the bigger area of grassland system. And just like any patchwork pattern, there's normally an overall organization of that pattern. So it might be, for example, there's a river going through that area and the distribution of trees is more numerous alongside the waterway, and then they become less numerous the further away from that waterway they are. And that patchwork habitat is being biologically organized by the action of grazers within that system. So if this was an African savanna, for example, just label my river here. So these are little forest patches. And this is grassland. So if this was Africa, you get the elephants moving through the system, and they act as the keystone ecosystem engineer of knocking down trees to keep the grassland system open for other grazers to be able to benefit from that system. And in any system there's always some dominant grazer that helps to control the regrowth of the forest and hold it back to keep the grassland open. And the grasses themselves can help maintain the system. So grasses have various abilities to withstand fire. So they encourage, through their drying out process, they actually encourage wildfires to start, and when wildfires start, they kill off the trees, and the grasses can resprout easily after the fires have passed. So it's normally a combination of grazing and fire that keeps that system open of trees, and that patchwork dynamic established between the forest systems and the grassland. So it's helpful to understand a little bit about the ecology of a grassland system so that we can best replicate that system in our own Broadacre Farm system, because it's that ecological system that we are best replicating within our design. Interestingly enough, with these two things here, the grazing and the fire, that's also attributed to the actions of humans. So we also act as an ecosystem engineer, just like elephants, and by burning down grassland systems and by controlling the regrowth of forest by the management of our grazers, we also act as an ecosystem engineer to control the level of regrowth of the forests. Normally we take it to the extreme of removal of all the forest because of how intensively we burn off that system and how intensively we stock our grazers in that system, and that leads to this ecosystem being out of balance. And without the trees being there, it tends to dry out. You haven't got the impact of the trees humidifying the air and increasing the local rainfall, so the whole system tends to dry out and become more fragile. And as you get a dry summer period, it can tip the system towards becoming a desert system, which is commonly associated with the impact of humans on a fragile grassland system. Some of the features of this grassland system is its high diversity because of the wide variety of different habitats and the high degree of edge habitats within the system. So you got all the you got some kind of forest remnant species hanging in the middle of these forest patches, there's a lot of forest edge habitat for a wide variety of species to inhabit that. You've got all these grassland system and normally interactions with waterways as well. So it's creating quite a diverse habitat, which is also very abundant. And it's perhaps not surprising that most of our agricultural species actually come from within this habitat. So when you look at all of our grazers, the sheep, the goats, the cows, the buffalo, all those kind of creatures have come from this grassland type system. And even when you look at our productive nuts and trees and berries, they're also associated with this system. So all our apple trees and nut trees and berry plants and all our wide variety of different medicinal herbs and the grasses obviously that we feed our grazers have all come from the system. So it's really a habitat that's closely aligned with our home, I guess, and when you look at the evolution of people, it's within this kind of habitat that we've evolved. So if we create this kind of habitat within our grazing system, it feels quite homely to us. It's the kind of habitat we evolved to inhabit. When we look at this detailed diagram here of this cow digestive system, we can help understand a little bit about the ruminant or grazer biology and how it ties in with the kind of fertility management of a pasture system and how we also manage the movement of those grazers in it. So when we break this kind of digestive system down, we've got the esophagus here, which is where the food enters down into the stomach. So in the stomach, if it's a ruminant, there's 4 chambers to that stomach, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and one of those is like our own, so it's got hydrochloric acid in there and it helps to sterilize the food and break down the food with the acids, and there's enzymes there that help to break down the proteins as well. But the thing that makes the ruminant stomach special and why it has 4 chambers is that it stores the bacteria in these chambers that break down the cellulose of plants. So cellulose is, when you look at a plant cell, it's the tough outer cell wall. So this cell wall has a lot of cellulose in it. And that cellulose can only be broken down by bacteria. We don't have the enzymes within our digestive system, no animal does, to break down the tough fibrous cellulose in the cell wall of plants, and you need to break that down to release the nutrients that are inside. So this is broken down by bacteria. And for a ruminant, they've got a special chamber within their stomach to house those bacteria, to break it down, and they've specialized to do this quite efficiently. So they'll pass it down to the first stomach, they'll regurgitate it up where it gets chewed again. So when you see cows just sitting in the pasture kind of chewing the cud, that's where they regurgitate up their grass that's already been pre-digested once for a second chewing, and that helps also break down the cellulose in the plant walls before sending it back down to the second chamber of the stomach, and then the third, and then the fourth before it goes through the small intestine. So the ruminants have specialized this stomach to be a place to house these bacteria that will break down the plant cell walls and release the nutrients. And then you got the small intestine. So that's pretty similar no matter what animal you look at. The role of the small intestine is to absorb nutrients. So we release enzymes at the start of that to break down proteins and carbohydrates and fats. And then as the food moves through the small intestine, it's very tightly packed together, and the nutrients are absorbed out of the small intestine into our bloodstream, where it's then transported around our body. So that's the role of the small intestine. And then the large intestine is got a few different roles. The main one is the absorption of water. So before it's excreted as feces, it needs to the water removed so that it's not too runny, otherwise we'd lose too much water, so it absorbs more water. And in many animals it also is a place where we can house the bacteria to break down cell walls. And that's also the case with us, so I'll just write houses bacteria. So in our own digestive system, we've got a specialization within our large intestine to house lots of bacteria, and that breaks down the cellulose and the plant material that we absorb to release those nutrients which can be absorbed through the lining of the large intestine into our digestive system. At that point, it's not as effective as doing it further up the digestive system, because then it goes through the whole small intestine. So the animals that do their digestion in the large intestine don't tend to break down the plant as effectively as the ruminants that can do it up in their stomach. So what they do is they have the cecum that's a kind of an extension of the large intestine, and it stores all the bacteria in it. And they're things like they're hindgut digesters like deer and rabbits and goats. And a lot of them, like rabbits, will actually eat their droppings again, because their digestive system, because it's breaking down the plant walls so far back in the digestive system, the nutrients haven't been well absorbed, so they often eat their feces to allow them to pass through their whole digestive system and better absorb those nutrients that have been already kind of broken down once within their feces. Or they're creatures like us that have a more diverse diet, so we eat meat and softer fruit and vegetables, and particularly with us we cook our vegetables to help break down the cellulose wall, so that's an adaptation that we've evolved to. And in that case, we don't even have a cecum, we just have an appendix, which is like a residual cecum. So it doesn't have a role as far as housing bacteria. We only house bacteria within our large intestine. And obviously we don't have a 4-chambered stomach either. So different animals have adapted this generic digestive system to be able to house the bacteria to break down plant matter at different parts of their digestive system. And then when you look at things like carnivores that don't break down plants at all, they have a very simplified digestive system. So they have a fairly large stomach to house a lot of meat when they're eating a big meal, and to sterilize it with the hydrochloric acids. And then the meat passes fairly quickly through their digestive system after that, because it doesn't want to stay in there for too long, otherwise it will start to rot and cause health problems. So they tend to wolf down their food, break it down fairly quickly, and it passes through. But with animal tissues, because it's not protected by the cellulose of the plant cell wall, it can be broken down more quickly and easily, and then therefore pass through the digestive system more easily. And particularly with us, when we cook our food, that helps break it down even more easily and allow us to absorb the nutrients more easily out of our food, and therefore send more energy to our brain to support the function of that, and which has supported our evolution. So we've got a design of a grazing system here. So just think about how the grazing system kind of sits in with the context of the other systems and the wider landscape. So generally in a permaculture setup where you've got a range of elevations, you would locate the house at mid-elevation, and that's so that you can store water and direct the water and the nutrients that are in that into your productive systems around the house. So in this example here, you've got the more natural areas here, so we'll call this native habitat. Up on the slopes to protect and stabilize those slopes and to feed nutrients into the system that will then collect in the water as it flows through that system, and then you can capture that water and those nutrients by swells or keyline design or some system to store and slow down that water and let it soak into the landscape. You've then got a forestry system here, below the level of the native habitat normally, and that's your long-term productivity system. Could be 20, 30-year type of forestry system. And then normally you have the grazing systems below that, bordering your orchard systems. And what you'd aim to do is have a series of different paddocks that you can move the stocks around, or even within these paddocks have some mobile electric fencing that you can cordon off certain areas of each paddock. And if this was a holistic grazing system, you'd aim normally to move those stock every day or two, and that would allow the stock not to have too heavy an impact on the grass within any particular area. So they are focused in on a particular area in high density and high numbers. They eat it down quickly and then moved on again before they cause too much structural damage on the soil and compact that soil too much. So they eat the grass down, convert the grass to manure, which is a great soil building amendment. So it's taking off the biomass of those producers, those grasses. It's putting it through the digestive system of an animal, covering it with all these beneficial bacteria, breaking it all down so that when it is delivered to the soil as a manure, it is easily absorbed by the decomposers in the soil and drawn into it to help build the soil and increase the organic content within the soil. So the holistic grazing system aims to be moving those stock through a series of paddock systems through the year, so that a particular area would get ideally a month or two rest before it gets those grazers back into it again. And then when the grazers are there, they're only there for a month. So it takes a bit of trial and error as far as the stocking rate and the area that you need for a particular number of stock. So it's these systems in New Zealand are conventionally done where the grass doesn't have much recovery and it's kept quite short. With this system, the grass is being kept quite long. So what is commonly referred to is that if you have an animal that's moving through the system, sorry, not very good at animals here, but there we go. So if you've got an animal moving through the system, generally you move them in when the grass is up to the knees of that animal, and then you move them out when it's up to the ankles. And generally in grazing systems in New Zealand, it's only ever up to the ankles, and it doesn't get that high. And the benefit of letting it grow longer is that the nutrient profile is actually better for the livestock, so there's a better balance of carbon and nitrogen, so the stock don't get bloat so badly as they would when it's fresh green pasture, which is higher in fresh new growth, which is higher in nitrogen. So there's a better balance of minerals and nutrients in the older pasture. The other benefits are there's a big root system involved associated with longer pasture. So when it is eaten back to this shorter length, the root system is also dies back a little bit. So you're not only getting the addition of organic matter from the plants back into the soil, but you're getting the addition of the organic matter from the roots back to the soil. So it helps build the carbon content within the soil more effectively and quicker if you let the pasture grow to a higher height before you allow the grazers to get in. Also, you tend to outcompete weeds, so as the more beneficial pasture plants are allowed to establish themselves and grow to a bigger height and perform their biological function within the soil and work with the soil biology, they're changing they're enriching the soil, so they've got more opportunity to send in their sugar exudates into the soil and build up the soil biology that's in the soil, and that improvement to the soil prevents weeds from getting established in that paddock and becoming a problem. So it's really when the grasses are short and they're overstressed all the time that weeds have the opportunity to take over that system and become established. So it's also a good system to manage weed growth. So you've got these paddocks around your orchard homestead area, and you cordon it off normally with mobile electric fencing so that you can move them between those paddocks move them between different sections of the paddock every day or so, and then you work out for the area that you've got what would be your stocking density so that you can move them around and every part of that paddock gets a good month to rest. And that's not necessarily just the paddocks on your property, it could be in collaboration with neighbours' properties, and you've got a system of kind of consolidating the stocks of both you and your neighbours and being able to move the stock through both of your properties to be able to create a movement system like this through both of your properties. But your aim anyway is to keep them there for a short duration so that they don't have too big an impact on the structure of the soil, and then to allow the plants to really regrow and structure and have good opportunity to fulfill their role as far as building up height and adding nutrients to the soil before you bring the grazers back into that system again.